big dumb idiot. Looks like you got yourself a saucy hand.
Yeah, I do.
Try yourself a Picasso boneless wing. Maybe next time.
Well,
Outlet Liquor is your place to buy a case. Stock up and save when you shop the lowest prices available every day at Outlet Liquor. You never have to wait for a sale. The more you buy, the more you save. Only at Outlet Liquor.
What's your outlet?
folks, welcome back to a brand new edition of the Crowd Assist podcasts. I'm one of your hosts today, Kevin Messeri, here with Mike Bunn, as always, and Aaron Freeman, Falcons fan, from Locked On Falcons, one of an old friend of mine from the Locked On days. Glad to have him on, one of the best Falcons guys I still continue to follow just throughout the years. We don't get to see the Falcons much, obviously, as Bills fans, we know. We only get to see him every 4 years right now. Maybe that increases a little bit with the new schedule layout that's going to intertwine a little bit. But Aaron, pleasure to have you on, man. How's the Falcons season going for you so far?
It's going all right. They're technically still in the playoff hunt, although they basically have to beat the Bills this weekend to maintain that status. And spoiler alert, I'm not expecting that. So if I sound like I'm getting ready for next season in some of the answers I give you, it's because I am. I kind of think the Falcons, 2021 season will, kind of come grinding to a halt on Sunday, but we'll see if they can surprise me in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, I remember similar. This was early season 2017, when the Bills last played the Falcons, and kind of similarly, the Bills weren't expected to do much. Ended up breaking their playoff drought that year. Played a little bit better. Tyrod Taylor had a pretty good year. Shady McCoy was pretty good. And the Bills ended up going to Atlanta and winning in a shocking kind of performance, Aaron. So anything's really possible in the way that this season's taught us, especially from a Bills perspective. They've taken care of the Chiefs. They've taken care of the Patriots. They had a huge, crazy win game that knocked them out. They lost to the Jags somehow down in Jacksonville. Aaron, anything can happen. Things are crazy in the league right now with COVID rules changing every day. We're going to start there. So I think I've seen Atlanta get hit decently hard by COVID, nothing to like their top end stars, but talk to us a little bit about that. I think I saw a couple more names go on, including Hayden Hurst. Are there some, obviously now that's after the 5-day window. So those are probably guys that are looking like they're going to be out, but talk to us a little bit about the names today and in general, the COVID, what's going on COVID wise in Atlanta.
Yeah, they've actually pretty much until the last 72 hours kind of really avoided the COVID bug. Yeah. They basically had a couple of guys that went on the list earlier this season. They had one guy last week when it really became a problem for most teams or a lot of teams around the league. And they just had one guy on the list last week, but they've put 11 guys on the list over the last 72 hours. Today, there were 4 more players added, including Hayden Hurst, their number 2 tight end, Jalen Hawkins, who's been sort of their starting strong safety now that Eric Harris is out for the season. There was another practice squad guy, and I'm blanking. A defensive lineman, Jonathan Billard, sort of a rotational piece there. So there's a couple of guys, particularly on the defensive line, where they've lost a couple of players, a couple of safeties. They lost their 2nd round pick, Richie Grant, earlier this week. And he's been basically their nickel cornerback. So he would be the guy responsible for covering, Cole Beasley this weekend. So that could be a significant blow there with his, fellow rookie Darren Hall. They've been kind of splitting reps these last couple of weeks. So it's not like Hall is untested in that regard, but Grant's kind of been the better of the two over these last couple of weeks. So nothing major in terms of big, world changing situations. I think the Falcons right now have the depth to deal with this issue to the point where they're losing some key players, but it's not going to necessarily change their game plan or whatever the case may be. But if they start losing some more guys later as this week unfolds, then we might get to some real problems where that the Falcons' depth won't be able to handle.
Yeah, and the Bills kind of were hit a little bit. Like they've been okay as well. Same kind of thing where mostly reserves. Started to bite the offensive line a little bit. You see names like John Feliciano, who had actually lost his job to Ike Butker. earlier this season. Ike Butker went out with a torn Achilles last week against New England. So we'll see if Feliciano plugs in or if Ryan Bates, a guy that they really like, who played really well against New England. The Bills had the best offensive line performance of the year last week, Aaron. So we'll see how that looks against the Falcons in this upcoming matchup. But, they had Feliciano, they had Dawkins second bout. First bout, he was in the hospital. Second bout, he came back and played really good against Matthew Judon last week. So that was really great to see. And they've been bitten a little bit. Obviously, Gabriel Davis and Cole Beasley are unvaccinated, but they're due to the new rules. They are able to play this week. So the Bills will have their whole complement of players, really, obviously, except for Trey White and Ike Butker. They've been fairly healthy, too. How about the health of the Falcons? Anything of note there that you see on the injury report? Anything to be noted even long-term prior to this week? Like, talk to me about that side of it.
Yeah, right now, the major injury for this week is Fabian Moreau, who missed practice on Wednesday with a rib injury. He's their starting corner opposite AJ Terrell. And if he doesn't go, given the already concerns that you have at the nickel cornerback position, they will basically be down to their fifth, I guess, corner, and Kendall Sheffield, who is a player that has started games for the team in the past, but has basically been relegated purely to special teams. He's played 0 snaps on defense so far this season and missed a lot of time in the summer with an undisclosed injury. So that's the situation as far as their injury report going into this week. As far as the sort of lingering issues, they're down a couple of starters. Eric Harris, earlier this season, they lost their nickel cornerback, Isaiah Oliver, which led to them basically taking Richie Grant, a safety, to moving him to nickel corner. Nothing else beyond that. I'm trying to think of like what other, obviously Calvin Ridley's out of the lineup with not a injury, but, mental health stuff. But outside of that, they've been pretty good on the injury front. They've been able to mostly avoid that. And that's been a knack for the Falcons. They've gotten this luck streak pretty consistently over the last decade where injuries haven't been too glaring an issue, to the point that whenever the Falcons lose like 3 starters to injuries, our fan base freaks out. He's like, oh my God, no one's had worse luck than us when it comes to the injury front, where, teams around the league are dealing with like 8 or 9 starters being out of lineup, and the Falcons missed 3. And it feels like to a lot of Falcon fans, the sky's falling. So they tend to do a pretty good job of avoiding major injuries in that regard.
How much of a threat are the Falcons to the Bills this weekend? Obviously, the Vegas line wouldn't indicate that, but it's been kind of a weird season for the Bills where they're 0-5 in games decided by 1 possession, and one of those included losing to a Jacksonville team where me and Kev were joking before the game that we thought the Bills could win with their 3rd-string quarterback, and then next thing you know, they can't score 10 points with Josh Allen. So going into this, do you think Atlanta has a realistic chance of giving the Bills any trouble on Sunday?
I mean, technically, I have to say yes, they do have a realistic chance because it's the NFL. And as you pointed out, Jacksonville had no chance going into that game and then proved that they did. I think the issue with the Falcons that they're dealing with is that consistently this season, they have looked good against bad teams like the Jacksonville Jaguars, like the Jets, etc. And most of their wins outside of the division have come against those lower rung teams that are going to probably be picking the top 5 or 6 picks in this upcoming draft. And then when they face better teams outside the division, so basically not Tampa Bay, they have tended to come out very flat and really struggled in those games. And so the Bills formula is, that same sort of thing where they fit into that same category of a team. And I go back to that Cowboys game that the Falcons got absolutely destroyed in by 40 points. And the expectation wasn't that the Falcons were going to win that game, but it was thinking, okay, against this Cowboys defense, I think the Falcons have a favorable matchup that they at least a portion of this game can keep pace with that Cowboys offense. And if they can do that going into the 4th quarter, where the Falcons have been pretty good in 1-score games, 7-2 so far this season, they'll have a chance there. And of course they come out completely flat. And I think when I look at this Bills team, I think their defense is better than Dallas's defense. I'm sure Bills fans won't disagree with that, but maybe that's a controversial take elsewhere in the country. But I think with the Bills pass rush, given the Falcons offensive line struggles, some of the playmakers they have on the back end, it's going to be much harder for this Falcons offense to keep pace with a Josh Allen led Bills offense. The fact of the matter is the Falcons have the worst pass rush in the NFL. So if you guys have concerns about your offensive line, the Falcons aren't really a team that's going to exploit that. Theoretically, they could if Grady Jarrett has a monster game. If Dante Fowler has a monster game, sure, it's technically possible, but they haven't really done that this season. Grady Jarrett's a good player, but team defenses are basically double teaming him on most passing downs, and the Falcons don't have another pass rusher that can really make them pay for that choice. And so that's been a big factor why Grady Jarrett isn't having the same type of production that we have grown accustomed to seeing him over the years. And the Falcons can't really stop the run, so they struggled against mobile quarterbacks. They don't have enough capable cornerbacks other than AJ Terrell to really cover teams that are 2 and 3 deep. That's why I used the Dallas example, because they have multiple wide receivers, and the Bills have multiple capable wide receivers with Diggs and Beasley and Emmanuel Sanders. So it's one of those things where this is a matchup that at no real reason to think that the Falcons are going to do things that they haven't done at all this season, which is show up against a good team. But that being said, maybe it happens. But I think if the Falcons are really going to win this game, it's going to be a similar situation as you had in that Jaguars game where Josh Allen just plays poorly, turns the ball over a bunch. Maybe the Falcons get a boost from special teams. Maybe the Falcons run game, which has been lackluster for most of this season, but it's been a little bit better over the last month, gets going and can sort of control the clock and do all those various things. And if that's the formula for the Falcons' success, then maybe they got a shot there. But given that the Falcons have not really shown that to date, it's hard for me to be optimistic that this is going to be the week on the road in the cold in Buffalo that they're all going to put it together. Certainly possible, but I'm not going to necessarily hold my breath.
And one thing that I like a lot, on Pro Football Reference, they have an expected win-loss. Obviously, the Falcons come in 7-8, still with, I guess, a shot if they win out and a million things go their way. But their expected win-loss record, according to Pro Football Reference, was something like 4.5 and 10.5. And sometimes you'll see it a game off, but you rarely see it 2.5 wins off. Last year would have indicated that the Bills weren't quite as good as what their 13-3 record indicated. And this year, we kind of seen a little bit of that falling back down to earth a little bit. When you watch this Falcons team, do you think their record is indicative of what they are, or do you think maybe they are a little bit more vulnerable than what their record is at this point of the season?
Yeah, it's funny you use the expected win-loss thing, because I've talked about that on Locked On Falcons, where it's last year their expected win-loss was like a 7-win team, but they only won 4 games because they were so terrible in one-score games. They, everybody knows the story of the Falcons blowing games in improbable ways in the final seconds last season. And this year they're basically a 7 or potentially 8-win team if they can pull off one of these wins in the last 2 weeks, with an expected win-loss record of like 4 or 5 wins, as you point out. And so it's completely flipped, and some of that is owed to the fact that they've been able to win a lot of close games. But as I pointed out earlier, they're going up against some bad teams, and they have enough firepower at the end of these games going up against teams like the Jaguars and the Jets and the Dolphins. I know the Dolphins have turned around their season, but at the point when the Falcons played them, the Dolphins were not playing particularly well. And so they find ways to win at the end. So that's a strength of this Falcons team, but that only seems to show up against basically teams that at some point in the season were projected to have top 5 picks, when that has been tested against better teams like San Francisco and New England and Dallas and Tampa Bay. And even going back to week 1 against Philadelphia, it has not shown up at all. So I do feel like their record is misleading. And my expectation going for this team going into 2022 is that they're probably going to be due to some regression, given that they're probably going to face a lot harder schedule this year. I think based off of the current win-loss record, they have the easiest schedule in the NFL in 2021. And next year they're going to probably have a much harder schedule because they're going to be facing the AFC North and the NFC West, in addition to getting their 17th game against the AFC West. So it's one of those situations where I do think this team's record may be a little bit misleading when we start projecting them forward into the future. I think they've earned their 7 wins this season. I think they've outplayed, for the most part, all the teams that they've beaten. And they've lost a couple of games where I felt like they outplayed a team like Washington earlier this season. So I don't feel like it's a fake 7 wins, but I think it gets enhanced quite a bit because they're not necessarily facing a who's who of teams this season.
Yeah, and the Bills obviously can go with you on that. I mean, the Bills have won each of their 9 games by 12 plus points. They have not even been close in games. New England game was probably the closest last week and was still a 2-possession game in hand, mostly by the Bills, especially in the second half. Bills were in pretty great shape throughout most of the game against New England. So they were 12 points plus in every single game. They've taken care of similarly. They have really taken care of some really bad opponents. But with New England being good, that made the Bills schedule a little bit harder than they were expecting. They didn't expect to have this pressure from New England at this stage. Earlier on this year, when the Jacksonville game went down, they're kind of like they were playing lackadaisical. They were just like, yeah, final drive, Josh Allen will score, we'll win. Like, we're that good. Like, there's no problems. It didn't happen. The last drive came, they got to the 30 again, sacked, this, that, and the other thing happened. And the next thing, they're out of field goal range and they can't even tie the game. So very, very weird situation. One that doesn't happen much under McDermott, Aaron, where they lose that game. McDermott's really good against teams with a losing record. It doesn't happen a good amount. It's mostly with the record. She has 9 wins, and majority of them, beside KC and New England, are against teams under 500. And then you have your Saints and Washington football teams of the world right there, kind of flirting with that 500 record. Atlanta, kind of flirting with that 500 record. Carolina was at the time that they played them. So, McDermott's really good in these games. Can McDermott win against winning opponents? But we say this, you look at Atlanta. We say this about everybody. Like, can anybody win against winning opponents? Like, I mean, I think that's a fair assessment. Not everybody has Patrick Mahomes. Can you win against teams with a good record? And Patrick Mahomes wasn't getting it done either earlier this year. So, everyone can kind of say that a little bit, but especially McDermott, it is heightened. The Bills do take care of opponents with losing records. They confuse the heck out of below average quarterbacks. And one that I think McDermott isn't superly impressed. Like, he doesn't want to have to play Matt Ryan right now. I mean, you can talk to me a little bit about Matt Ryan in your opinion. I think I've seen some of your tweets about Matt Ryan a little bit. But I'm interested to know like where you stand on Matt Ryan. But how about Matt Ryan in 31-degree weather outside, 15-mile-an-hour winds with potentially some snow? Tell me about not just Matt Ryan. We'll let you talk about Matt Ryan for a minute, as well as the team. Is that like conditions like, because even the Bills aren't prepared, as you can see nationally, depending on the game. It's not 55-mile-an-hour winds. Bills fans will take 15-mile-an-hour winds with some snow outside all day of the week because that's semi-normal here. How about Atlanta, though? Coming into that environment outdoor and in a pretty raucous crowd with the AFC East on the line for the Bills, and technically they probably clinch with a win too, at least for the playoffs. How does that all play into this for Atlanta? Like coming up there, really could be crazy elements there in Orchard Park. Like how does all that play a role in for you?
Yeah, Matt Ryan doesn't have a long history of cold weather games. And just off the top of my head, like when I think about times where the Falcons have had to go to places like Green Bay or whatever the case may be late in the season, I don't think it's particularly worked out in the Falcons' favor, but it's not something that you usually see. Like I know typically when I check the schedule in April or May, I guess this year when it was released, I always look to say, are we on the road in a cold weather environment in December? Because the Falcons are kind of that classic dome team where they typically are much better indoors, where the conditions are optimal. And when you're forced to make them play a little bit more left-handed in the environment, they have not been a team that has consistently responded. And typically the type of team that you want to be in those situations is that physical team that can, as the Patriots did, run the ball, 47 times or whatever it was in that game, to basically take that out of it. And the Falcons don't really have that element as far as the ground attack goes. They want to be that type of team. That's what Arthur Smith wants to be. So maybe in the future, 4 years from now, when the Falcons are facing the Bills again, potentially, or maybe sooner than that, as part of the 17 game formula or whatever the case may be, that the Falcons will have built that type of team that could go into a cold weather environment and basically say we're going to win in the trenches and win that way. And that's not really where the Falcons are built to be this season. So I don't have a lot of confidence that, given the conditions that typically, spur teams to be a little bit more conservative and run the football and try to win in the trenches, that plays into the Falcons' favor because that's been their biggest weakness all season long, that they consistently, when they have lost and been embarrassed by various teams throughout the season and gotten blown out in several games, it's because they've gotten their butts kicked in the trenches. So I don't feel like that's going to magically turn around this week, but you never know. I think they'll be committed to trying to run the football again. This is what Arthur Smith wants to be, and so maybe this is going to be the week where he can get those guys motivated to play the style of football that he wants to have.
If you're Atlanta, what is your strategy on offense in order to come away with a win? I know you said trenches not been strong, but that's something that Arthur Smith wants to be more successful in. Obviously, guys like Patterson and Kyle Pitts are threats on the offensive side of the ball. Who do you think they will be going through on Sunday?
Yeah, I think they're going to be an establish the run type of football team. I don't think they want to get into a shootout with Josh Allen, with Stephon Diggs, with Beasley and Sanders, given the concerns we have with the Falcons on the defensive side of the ball, not being able to pressure the quarterback, not necessarily having the playmakers in the secondary for the reasons that we discussed earlier. I think they're going to want to basically borrow the game plan that the Detroit Lions pulled last week with Tim Boyle as their quarterback, and they basically just ran the ball, 30 plus times and basically took the ball out of Tim Boyle's hands. And when they were forced to throw the football, they threw the ball to Amon-Ra St. Brown, and that was a pretty effective strategy. And the Lions have been a team that's consistently punched above their weight this season and nearly pulled off the victory. It got stopped in the second to last play at the 1 yard line with an interception by Foye Oluokun. So I think that's kind of going to be the Falcon strategy. They're going to want to limit Josh Allen's opportunities, run the football, control the clock, and then when they have opportunities to throw the ball, be able to move the chains with guys like Russell Gage and Kyle Pitts and Cordero Patterson, who have been effective weapons for Matt Ryan, but not necessarily the type of team and game plan that's built to drop back and throw the ball 40, 50 times, because that's going to expose this Falcons offensive line to a Bills pass rush that doesn't get a ton of sacks, but gets a lot of pressure. And, that's not going to be a good formula for success for the Falcons. So I think they'll have a generally conservative game plan and hope that they can establish and run the football.
And can you talk about Pitts a little bit? Such a special season for a rookie tight end. Obviously had all of the hype coming in, but it seems like he's surpassed that with his play on the field. Obviously some debate whether you should pick a tight end that high in the draft or not. After what you've seen this year, would you make that pick again? And even if you wouldn't, just talk about what it's been like just to watch him on the field with the Falcons this year.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the pick goes, I was firmly in the side of taking a quarterback because I felt like the Falcons, that position has more value. This was a golden opportunity for the Falcons to land a potentially great quarterback. Obviously, Justin Fields hasn't quite lived up to that status. Obviously, Mac Jones kind of has. So that's going to be a topic of conversation for several years now, whether or not the Falcons should have drafted a quarterback. And the only way that the Falcons can really say, oh, we made the right selection is by winning football games. And certainly Kyle Pitts helps their ability to do that. So I have no regrets over the selection. It was basically all offseason long. I said, basically, if you don't fall in love with a quarterback, take Kyle Pitts. He's the best player available. And that's basically the Falcon strategy. So I have no qualms about that. So while I personally probably would have taken the quarterback, I'm not regretting that decision in the slightest. And as far as watching him play, it's been interesting because Kyle Pitts is having this historic rookie season. He's on pace, if he gets 51 yards this week, he'll be the second tight end in NFL history to pass 1,000 yards as a rookie. It's one of those things. He's having this historic year, but yet there are still kind of like people saying like, he's a little disappointing because he's not being this dominant red zone target that we thought he would be. I remember going into the season, I projected him to have like 10 to 12 touchdowns this year. He has one. And I don't think that's the fault of Kyle Pitts. I spend a lot of time on Locked On Falcons complaining about how he's utilized in the red zone and whatnot. So I won't bore you guys with that, but I think, as Falcon fans, we're kind of used to it with Julio Jones or whatever. And I think that's part of it where a lot of people came into it with given all the hype, thinking, okay, he's going to instantly be Julio Jones. And he hasn't been that type of guy, but he's been a very good player for the Falcons and has had some dominant performances. And if you watch his highlight reel, you're going to sit here and say, like, this is one of the greatest tight ends to come into the league And I think he's got that type of potential, given where he started to do the things as a rookie that pretty much nobody has done in basically 50 years since Mike Ditka did it in 1961. Is
Yeah.
a great start for his career, and the sky is the limit for him. And so I have no qualms about Kyle Pitts and how he's performed. I think he's a special player, and certainly there have been, nitpicks as far as his usage in the red zone. It's like, well, maybe we can find ways to get him the ball a little bit more than the Falcons have done, to the point that he could even be more productive than he has been this season. And I think you're starting to see that a little bit. They did that a little bit more against Detroit, trying to get him the ball underneath and letting him cook after the catch. And I think that's a way that the Falcons can utilize this game plan against the Bills to complement whatever running game that they have by, throwing the ball short and intermediate throws to Kyle Pitts, rather than just kind of relying on him to be this vertical threat and playmaker, which he has been. But that is not necessarily the way that the Falcons have really built their offense to be this, push the ball down the field type of offense. But Kyle Pitts has been that primary option for them when they do decide to do that. So he has the skill set to be that guy. But I think, being a little bit more of a ball control maybe plays to the Falcons' strengths this weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, maybe with Hayden Hurst out, he gets this opportunity at the end of the year here to get a few more snaps. What else is there to lose? If it doesn't work out, okay. There's a lot that you could gain from seeing some more red zone snaps and red zone targets. Why not? I mean, quite frankly, you'll probably need to score most likely to keep up anyways. I think for the Bills in this matchup specifically, there's a lot of talk about if we control the ball and we run the ball, we'll be fine. New England tried that again with at least average conditions. It wasn't beautiful by any stretch in Boston on Sunday, but if the weather isn't 55-mile-an-hour winds and your kicker can't kick and your quarterback can't throw, Josh Allen has shown right now since the second half of Tampa Bay, really, where the Bills dominated the Buccaneers and took them to overtime. Some controversial calls, some things that went the Bucs' way late in that game is what it is. The Bills have been playing really, really, really good football right now. They've been playing a really good stretch. They absolutely dominated Carolina, absolutely dominated second half and against the Bucs. And that, for the most part, absolutely dominated the Patriots in a game where the Falcons struggled against New England. I'm interested about that because they're the last two Bills opponents, but what happened in that game? I know you went to three different quarterbacks in that game, actually. New England just dominated. It was a little closer than that ending kind of said. I remember watching it. What happened in that game? It does seem like Atlanta may have been able to match up with that style of football a little bit in terms of New England. Besides them playing Dallas and them scoring in bunches, we've watched them a lot. They don't score a ton of points in terms of what they can do offensively. They're creative. They score special teams. They've been struggling in special teams lately in New England, but they're creative. Their defense gives them a lot of points, etc. And they did in that game against Atlanta. But talk to me about what was that game like? I mean, you're going to get a matchup in the Bills they're riding a little bit hotter than New England right now in terms of what they're able to do. Josh Allen's playing all world. Them trying to slow the game down might be dangerous because they're going to need to score points, Aaron. At the end of the day, the way Allen's playing outside of a mishap in Jacksonville, he's scoring a lot of points. So the Bills are obviously the second and third in a lot of statistical categories offensively. So talk to me a little bit about that New England game for a minute. And then I get the New England game plan in the 55-mile-an-hour winds. I get what Detroit was able to do a little bit, but talk to me about is there a little bit of what do we have to lose by just stepping back there, throwing it, seeing what we're able to do with Pitt, seeing what we're able to do with Gage, some of that other kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think what you're saying is music to the ears of a lot of Falcon fans who would like to see that type of offense, but that just hasn't been really the case for Arthur Smith. He has been generally conservative this year, to the point that even in that Lions game last week, there was a quote that came out from Dan Campbell after the game where he opted to kick a field goal down, I think 9 or whatever the case may be, or 7 or whatever it was, in the closing minutes, rather than going for inside the 10-yard line, largely because he expected Arthur Smith to be very conservative and they would have an opportunity to get the ball back. And they did get the ball back thanks to a Russell Gage fumble and nearly were able to pull that off. So going back to that New England game, I thought the Falcons defense played pretty well. New England was able to run the football effectively against them, and Mac Jones was very efficient, on the short and intermediate passes, which he has been throughout the season. And so New England was effective with their offense, but it wasn't like they were doing a ton of great things. The Falcons were able to get some stops off in the red zone. They were able to get some stops on third down. And so they were able to keep New England's offense in check, that if the Falcons offense had shown up in that game and been able to put points on the board rather than getting blown out 25-0, it's a possibility that they could have, gone blow for blow with that team and been in it in the closing minutes rather than throwing in their backups and having those guys throw picks or whatever the case may be. So it's one of those situations where, I think the formula for the Falcons would be in a lot of people's eyes to just, look, we're not going to be able to check Josh Allen. Let's see if we can try to outscore this team. And again, going back to that Dallas game, that was what I expected to see the team do, and they completely failed doing that. So I think Arthur Smith wants to be this sort of run first conservative coach, and eventually I think the Falcons can get there. I just don't know if it's going to be this weekend.
Yeah, that's fair. Fair enough. Obviously, this show is brought to you by Outlet Liquors and Picasso's Pizza. We have a few minutes left here with Aaron Freeman. I have to get you on record. What is your opinion on Matt Ryan going forward for the franchise of the Falcons? You probably talk about it all the time and other crossovers, whatever, but we're interested here in Buffalo to know, what's the future of Matt Ryan? Is he a Falcon next year? Are you drafting somebody in a pretty average to below average class? I guess wrap us up by telling us what's going to go on there and what's the future, while in the same sentence, what's the future of the division now with the Saints struggling? They can't find a quarterback. They don't know what's going on there. Obviously, who knows what happens with Tom Brady, if he plays till he's 100 or if he's done soon. Like, what's the future of this division? Carolina is a mess too. There's a lot of room there for Atlanta to grab something there. So what's your future with Ryan, and what's the future in the division as it pertains, I guess, to the Falcons?
Yeah, and we've inherited your worries about Tom Brady and why won't he go away? So we're now dealing with that down in Atlanta, while you guys spent basically 20 years dealing with that in Buffalo. So thanks for that. I think with Matt Ryan, he's pretty safe for next year. I know there's going to be a lot of talk and speculation about whether or not the Falcons can and will trade him, and certainly I think the Falcons will explore their options. And if some team comes away and blows them away with like a Matt Stafford level deal, I think the Falcons will certainly very much consider the possibility of moving on from Matt Ryan. And I think his future beyond 2022 is certainly in doubt. My expectations this offseason is the Falcons will restructure him for the 80th time in his contract, and basically play it year to year. And if Matt Ryan bounces back and has a good 2022, and this team, makes it look like, that expected win-loss and that regression that we talked about earlier in the game that may be coming against a harder schedule is not the case, and the team looks like a competitive, improved playoff team, then Matt Ryan will be back in 2023. As for the draft, I don't think the Falcons are going to be using one of their number one picks on a quarterback, but I certainly think they'll explore their options on probably like day 2 in the middle rounds of the draft to get somebody behind Matt Ryan that they can at least start to talk about, okay, maybe this guy has the potential to be his successor, whether that's in 2023 or 2024 or beyond. I think that the Falcons have to start moving in that direction. They tried to go with AJ McCarron. He got injured. Then they brought in Josh Rosen. He was a disaster. Felipe Franks, an undrafted free agent, has been a disaster. They just brought in Mac Barkley today to basically replace Franks because he's now on the COVID list. So I don't think the Falcons can really go the veteran quarterback route anymore. I think they have to start planning towards the future, and I think that includes taking a quarterback that is probably, as you mentioned, a down quarterback class. But I think they'll have some opportunities to get at least a decent developmental guy somewhere, after round 1 in this upcoming draft class, and we'll just sort of have to see how it goes from there. I think Matt Ryan has had a down season. I think he's really missed not having a reliable option like Julio Jones in his offense, but I think given my expectations, what Kyle Pitts will be better, Calvin Ridley will be better, Arthur Smith will be better, the run game, the offensive line will all be better in 2022. I feel like Matt Ryan should be expected to bounce back in 2022, and essentially, if he does, is kind of it's an or else type of situation. If he doesn't bounce back, then he's probably not going to be in Atlanta for much longer. But right now I feel like the odds are in his favor that he will have a bounce back season. We'll just sort of have to see how it all plays out.
For sure. And then obviously Bills fans have a mini rivalry with the Titans. They've had this mini thing going on for a little while. Arthur Smith's a guy that we never liked to match up against at times. We thought he was a pretty good offensive coach. So whenever we do the Titan show, like they were pretty complimentary of him. So I think that there's some hope there. And like I said, if something happens to Brady and he's finally done at some point here, I do think there is some level of grasping that the Falcons can do with the other two franchises. To me, like the Saints are like 100 million over the cap, and the Panthers are a mess. And I mean, just there is some hope there, and I really think that it's possible. Like the Falcons, when I saw the schedule, I was like, there's chance that they have this record. I mean, they do. They have 7 wins. I mean, I thought there was a chance they may have 8 or 9 coming into this game. And like you said, they left some games hanging in the balance there that they could coming into this game, showing that. So it wasn't a great game. Like I think Bills fans are feeling pretty optimistic after winning against New England. And then Atlanta having to come here in the elements. They feel like that's probably enough of optimism. But Aaron, I got to get you on record one last time. What's the score prediction and why? We'll get you out here and really appreciate your time.
Yeah, I'm thinking it's going to be, I'm hoping that the weather maybe keeps Buffalo's offense in check somewhat, and they don't drop a 30 burger on the Falcons. So I'm thinking it's probably going to be like 27-17, a Bills win.
That sounds about right. Aaron, anything you're working on? Tell our Bills listeners where they can find you. Locked On Falcons, anything, great daily podcast over there. One of my favorites. I've listened to you on and off for 4 or 5 years now. So, kind of tell us where we can find you and anything you're working on.
You can find Locked On Falcons on a variety of podcast platforms, pretty much all of them. You can also check it out on YouTube if that's what you're into. I do occasionally write written content at thefalcoholic.com, the SB Nation website for the Atlanta Falcons. I haven't written much in the last 2 weeks, so I think I'm due to write something this week about this Bills game. So, I'll take some of the things that we talked about tonight and maybe apply them.
Awesome.
Some article later this week at thefalcoholic.com.
Aaron, thank you so much. Really appreciate you. Maybe we'll catch up for a Super Bowl crossover sometime in the next couple of years. If not, this extra 17th game, you never know. There could be some future that these teams could play in the next year or two again. Maybe instead of every 4, every 2. We'll see if they match up in the same placing rankings going forward. But Aaron Freeman, thank you so much for your time, man. Appreciate you doing your Buffalo Bills rounds too. I know you got other shows to get to. Thanks again for coming on, man, and we'll keep in touch.
All right, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks, man. Talk to you later. Mike, so that was, fantastic stuff from Aaron there, getting into that a little bit. Always good insights to have him on here to go through that. Mike, what are your reactions, though? I know, you've been at a couple games. We haven't had you on in a week or two. Like, what are you feeling like, coming off of a pretty good Panthers win, off of a pretty good Patriots win, off of a really good second half against the Bucs, really 10 good quarters of football. Hopefully leading to another 8 good quarters of football, Mike, and the division, and maybe the 3 is about what they're projected at right now. Some crazy things could get them a 2 or the 4. But talk to me, Mike. How you feeling? Check in with me right now.
I think confidence level is really high right now. I feel like the fan base is back to where we were at the beginning of the year when we were 4-1 and the Bills were rolling over teams like Houston and Washington. I think that's what defeating a Patriots team that the media is overhyped for the past 2 months will do to a fan base because now this Bills Mafia believes that they're back to being a Super Bowl contender, and we'll see if that's the case. The narrative is that the halftime adjustments or whatever took place during halftime against Tampa Bay has turned things around. It looks good right now. It feels like that could be the case, and with a couple cupcakes sitting on the schedule, that might be the narrative all the way into the playoffs. But I'm kind of right where you are. I'm cautiously optimistic. I think right now, anything less than winning the AFC East would be a disappointment. You can't lose either of these next 2 games, especially with how big of a favorite they'll be at home. I think the 3 seed is the most likely destination. I know some fans are talking about the 1 and the 2, that's just not going to happen. It's less than a 1% chance for the 1 seed. You need Kansas City to lose out, which ain't going to happen.
Same with Tennessee.
And Tennessee ain't going to lose to Jacksonville the final week of the season, regardless of what weapons they have or don't have. So I think you're looking at the 3 because most likely Cincinnati's going to lose to Kansas City this week. The question is, who are you going to play as the 6? Assuming you get the 3, is it going to be New England, which looks like the most likely opponent. Does Indy somehow lose to Las Vegas this week? That would be a nightmare scenario in my opinion. You don't want to play the Colts in the first round, especially with their physicality and Jonathan Taylor just obliterating opponents right now. That sounds like a nightmare week one matchup. The outside possibility is Miami.
I was going to say Miami. They're sneaking around.
It sounds crazy, but you're praying Miami wins out. If they can get wins against Tennessee and New England, which really isn't as crazy as what some might think. I wouldn't pick it to happen, but it's possible. I think that's a perfect scenario. You're talking about a team that have a 9-game winning streak, getting some of that hype to get Bills Mafia and the Bills players a little bit of they'd have to take them seriously. But you look at the Dolphins, they've mostly beaten up on bad quarterbacks and backups for a lot of the streak. Outside of Lamar Jackson in Baltimore, they really haven't beaten a lot of talented teams. So if somehow Miami can squeak in, I think that's the best case scenario. And also it sets up a scenario where, say New England does get the 7 seed or somehow the Chargers squeak in as a 7. They could be playing at Tennessee in the first round of the playoffs, could pull off an upset, and you could be looking at a round 2 game in Buffalo, assuming the Bills win in that scenario. And even if even if Tennessee does win, I don't think the Titans as a round 2 matchup on the road is the scariest thing in the world either. So to wrap up, I'm feeling good right now, but not overconfident. This Bills team has shown us that you can't get overconfident with them until they clean up some of these single score games and find a way to win when it matters. But looking good going into the second last week of the regular season.
Yeah, what we have up here is the playoff simulator. We're going to talk about it for a minute. Mike brought up a couple scenarios, but I think more likely than not, obviously, as you're looking here, I simulated the final 2 weeks with likely favorites. And in tune, there are some likely favorites here that I don't think a ton of upsets happen here at the top of the AFC. But in Mike's doomsday, what about, is Carson Wentz ready to go? We'll look what happens if the Raiders take care of business, though, Mike. Maybe doomsday scenario puts the Raiders there next to the Bills in a scenario. And pushing Indy because they would have the tiebreaker. They would lose the tiebreaker to LA. Maybe Las Vegas. They're the ones that would go to Tennessee in the first round in an AFC South battle. Right then and there. And then what's really interesting about this scenario, all that needs to happen is Wentz doesn't play. The Raiders get another quarterbackless game. The line's already swung 6 points. We'll see if Wentz is ready to go. But in these scenarios,
if somehow that happens, where the Raiders are playing Buffalo in the first round, I could see that being the wild card Monday night game on ESPN.
Probably.
Now, I'm not. It feels like that'd be an interesting Monday night. Now, I guarantee you, McDermott and the Bills wouldn't want to be in that Monday night game just because it gives them less time heading into any potential second round matchup should they win. But there is a little bit of intrigue to that if your scenario does come to play. New England, Cincinnati, that's kind of a boring game when I think of it. Same with Indianapolis, Tennessee. That's a boring AFC South. And it's always the AFC South that gets that first game on Saturday in the boring time slot. So if you're going to have 2 AFC South teams match up, that's going to get the boring time slot. So I think either way, whatever happens, it's going to be a fun couple weeks. And right now we got 2 straight January games in Buffalo, win the division, get it to 3. Some magic happens. We might have home games in the Ralph for the next 4 weeks in January. That's crazy to think about.
And if Miami's able to win out, they're in at the 7 seed, they're locked in, they would play Tennessee. That would put us into Mike's doomsday scenario getting Indy in this stage.
Don't want that.
Unless Indy takes the win against Las Vegas. And then look at this scenario here, the Bills, Dolphins.
I would take this scenario.
A couple decent scenarios here, Mike, and there's only a doomsday scenario that involves the Colts and a back-to-back seasons, and it really does involve a few goofy things happening. I don't see it happening, but crazier things have happened in the NFL this year. It is likelier that they play New England Second likeliest to me is randomly Las Vegas. I think that's a potential scenario with only one game going in a not favorites way. And then obviously this Miami scenario here is last and least likely. But this is a scenario where if they take care of Tennessee in a game where their defense plays really good, they just get it done, you can start going into week 18 with a lot of intrigue on this New England game. This New England game at the end of the year here, where this is back to, if New England wins, we would play New England. If New England loses, we would get Miami. So that's a lot of intrigue on that game for Bills fans to win. A lot of interest to either win and play the winner. You would win and play the winner. How about that?
Definitely a lot of possibilities. One other thing that stands out to me, this is non-Bills related, but we have Cincinnati in there as the 4 safely. There's a lot of interesting scenarios
for the Browns.
AFC North. The Cleveland Browns could still sneak in at 9-8. And it's really a lot easier than what people think. They just need the Rams to beat Baltimore, Kansas City to beat Cincinnati, and then the Browns win their final 2 games against Pittsburgh and Cincy, and then they'll get in. And I think going into week 18, that Cleveland and Cincinnati will be a play-in game for the AFC North.
Yeah, and let's say we play that out and we are able to pick. I do think Cleveland should be able to beat Pittsburgh this week. And then, if I flip the results like I just did from Cincinnati here, which is now it's still in the 4 seed to Cleveland, they do take it over. So that could be a win and in scenario there. And then fully pushing the Bengals down to the 7 seed. What a matchup that is. 2v7, Tennessee.
Tennessee doesn't want that. Tennessee does not want that.
No, they're not interested in that. But they have bad. I mean, if something happens with the Colts, they can match up with them. Sitting at the 2 seed isn't ideal except for maybe getting the second home game. But you're going to have a potentially one of those teams that has a bad result sitting in that 7 seed. So I don't know. I think the 2 is actually a little bit more.
I think we might see a 7-2 upset. I'm really not high on Tennessee, and I really think some of the teams that are fighting for that 7 spot are good enough to pull off the upset. In fact, I might pick the 7 seed regardless of who's playing Tennessee in that game.
Right. And, if you look at it like here, I think what's interesting is obviously, they took a big hit, but obviously the Chargers still play a role in this. That also could be a play-in game here. This Chargers-Raiders game here at the end of the year could be a play-in game. But the Raiders if the Raiders beat the Colts this week, they're in. I mean, they're in a lot of scenarios. So that's a big, either they're out in a lot of scenarios or they're in a lot of scenarios.
And the Raiders-Chargers game earlier this year was a good one. That was the Monday Night Football game back and forth. So it's amazing that everything is in front of Vegas to make a run after everything they've dealt with this year, with losing John Gruden, losing Ruggs. They somehow managed to make the playoffs after really being left for dead just a little bit ago when last second kick against Washington that they lost the game. It would be really an incredible story for this team to end up making the playoffs.
And once again, here's chalk for everybody tuning in right now. This is pretty much chalk. This is if matchups for the most part hold true. This is what your playoff scenarios would look like. It is still probably the most likely here that the Bills would face the Patriots if all holds up. But this can go into a frenzy really quickly with a couple of games, maybe even as many as one game going a different way. But if all probabilities hold true, this is what you'd be looking at. It is what should happen if you were to pick what should happen going forward. This is kind of what the 7 should look like. It's probably the best 7 to me, probably in pretty close to order. I think the Bills today are better than the Titans. Outside of that, it's probably pretty close to the order of the AFC. So, but Mike brought up the Bengals scenario. There's obviously that Dolphins scenario still hanging around. There's that Raiders scenario still hanging around too. So there's a couple scenarios. Bengals not affecting the Bills too much. The Browns and the Bengals scenario not affecting the Bills too much. But that Raiders and that Dolphins scenario, to turn this thing completely upside down. All does it take, Mike, is that Dolphins win against Tennessee this week. Maybe even root for it for fun.
I'm rooting for it, dude. I'm rooting for it. Yeah, I bring the Dolphins.
Because there it is right there. There it is right there. If it's chalk across the board with just the one Dolphins win, there it is, baby.
And I'm not just rooting for it because it would be interesting. I'm rooting for it because I also think it's the best matchup for the Bills, bringing an average to below average armed quarterback with really
middle of
not
January.
a strong running attack into Buffalo. Yes, sign me up. Miami
It's the
struggled
playoffs.
this-
You're not going to just get a free win.
Yeah.
But Miami and Las Vegas are teams that you'd probably want to see here, and you want to avoid, number one, the Colts. And then ideally, you probably want to avoid Bill Belichick more than the Patriots, right? You probably want to avoid Belichick more than you do the Patriots team. Outside of that, though, like how about, I don't see, as we've looked here, there's not a ton of scenarios that match the Bills with the Chargers, but that's not an ideal. I don't love that either because they could get hot. You know, I don't know. This Chargers team kind of reminds me of the last year's Colts team a little bit, Mike.
Yeah. No, I agree. The way I'm thinking right now, it's New England unless something funky happens with the Colts or Miami. That's when you have a 49% chance of playing a team in the playoffs, and there's still 2 weeks left in the season. You know that the scenarios are lining up for that.
There it is. So it would take the Colts losing out to play the Chargers. So not a likely
match. Never lose to Jacksonville. So I'm mentally preparing myself for Belichick coming to Buffalo in the playoffs.
Is that what it is? 49%? Is that what they have it at?
That's what ESPN had it at. So 49%. That's a coin flip. That's a very strong likelihood. The only way it doesn't happen.
Who's number two? Who do they have as number two? Did you see?
They were showing just random matchups.
Got it.
I don't know for the Bills who's number two, but really the only way it doesn't happen is if somehow Miami wins out or if the Colts lose to the Raiders this weekend.
Yeah, if Miami is the wild card, really, literally in this scenario, they're literally the wild card in the wild card race, because if it's chalk, this is what we're looking at, obviously. But if they go ahead and get it done, I mean, things get goofy. Like, this game is a big game at the end of the year, because technically, if the Bills lose to the Jets too, I mean, that opens up a bunch of things that could happen. Let's
not even address that.
No, but I'm looking at it from a New England point of view, right? I'm looking at it from an AFC East point of view.
If the Bills lost to the Jets, that would be a bigger miracle than the Andy Dalton 4th down throw to beat Baltimore to get them in the playoffs.
And they're still in a lot of scenarios as the 7th seed going to New England now. So that's probably why, even in a loss against the Jets, that adds to that 49% Mike's talking about there. So there's a lot of I guess intrigue, because week 18, but this only matters with the Dolphins victory against the Titans. If that doesn't happen, week 18 might be a little bit more low key.
How about that? Fans. Going up against Ryan Tannehill, trying to keep your playoff chances alive. Could it be Ryan Tannehill?
Right there. There it is, going back to Nashville.
Yeah. You got to love the NFL. These stories just write themselves. The headlines, the craziness, it just plays out right in front of us, and we're always handed something amazing at the end of the day.
Well, guys, it was a pleasure being on this episode of the Crowd Assist podcast. Don't want to go through too many scenarios. Maybe we'll hit this up again if it's relevant next week. We'll go through some scenarios here after we have some clarity into week 17, like a couple of things that we're still just guessing on. If we clean up week 17 a little bit, week 18, we can play around a little bit more and get in some more in-depth stuff on who you literally want to root for. Right now, I'm just saying maybe root for Miami would be a little bit interesting next week. I'm not going to be overly upset if they don't beat Tennessee, but maybe it is interesting to root for Miami just to send this whole thing into a frenzy. And then the second game, if you're rooting for anybody, Mike brought up the Browns. If they beat the Steelers, that could make some things interesting. Not as much for the Bills. Obviously, we don't really want the Bengals to beat the Chiefs. There's really no benefit for the Bills in that regards. I mean, definitely don't want the Ravens to win. As far as this week goes, maybe Denver over LA makes it interesting, because Baltimore could sneak in. They're not a great team either right now. You wouldn't hate to have to see them if something plays out that way either, because if things get funky, they could play their way into this thing as well, Mike, a little bit. So
yep.
Still that Colts scenario where I'm not looking forward to that at all. But Really a pleasure to get Aaron on the show, kind of go through these scenarios. The Bills, most importantly, do control their own destiny. They need to take care of business. They cannot let this slip through the cracks. I think that's already happened in the Jags game. I think they've already seen that enough. I think they're playing good football. I think you kind of see a game similar to that Panthers game, Mike. That is what I see here. A little bit better offensively than Carolina, but defensively, Carolina's a better defensive team than Atlanta. Atlanta's a mess defensively.
I don't know how Atlanta will.
They're a mess defensively. They're a mess.
This Atlanta team has, I believe, only 16 sacks the whole year. They do not generate much pressure. They
don't have the Jags defense. Look at what the Lions were able to do. They don't even have the Jags defense.
This is a team that has allowed, I believe, 29 passing touchdowns. They don't get a lot of takeaways. They've allowed over 1,800 yards on the ground.
That's wild.
If I'm the Bills, I use these next 2 weeks to obviously you want Allen to get his numbers and put these games away, but I try to mix in a little bit more of the run, try to continue to show, maybe put on tape that we can run the ball heading into the playoffs, so teams have to take that dimension a little bit seriously. I know the Bills don't have the best rushing attack in the league, but just put a little bit on tape to let teams prep for it going into the playoffs. And the one stat before we close that I still find amazing is we know the Bills struggle to run, but Josh Allen is, I believe, the top yards per carry player in the NFL among those that have reached the amount that you need to qualify. And I believe Devin Singletary, I don't know if it's still the case now, was also number 9 or in the top 10. So it's one of those things where I think oftentimes we look at the Bills and we say they can't run. And it's because in big situations where they need to get a yard, they struggle to get that yard. But the Bills do get yardage on the ground. It's just it comes in different ways than what traditionally you expect teams to do it.
Sure. And to Mike's point, Josh Allen has 102 carries for 6.1 yards per carry, the most for qualifying, whatever they would consider qualifying at this stage. Maybe it's 50 carries. I don't know.
He's going to set his record for most rushing yards in a single season this year, assuming that he gets, I think, like 10, 15 yards, something like that. So it's not like we're seeing him run the ball a lot more than years past. I think he's actually pretty close to what he's always gone for in carries and in similar numbers like that. So I think the touchdown numbers might be half of what they normally are. But Josh Allen has been a very productive runner this year when he's taken off with the ball.
For sure. And Devin Singletary is running at 4.6 yards per clip. Fairly efficient here as well. 28th and 29th ranked total yardage rushers in the league. So, Mike, great addition. We'll be back at you, bringing in some more scenarios, bringing in some more stuff. We got Tyson Rout from Let's Talk Jets next week. My guy Ty will be on. Going to be a great show. We talked about this game maybe being for the division a little bit jokingly, like 2 months ago, and now it definitely is, for better or for worse. It is, at the very least, it is for the division. The Bills will need to win no matter what. So, Mike, we're really looking forward to that one with Ty. Great. He's always a great show. Got to recap the Jets with him next week. And we'll bring him some playoff scenarios as well. But from the Crowd Assist podcast, Picasso's Pizza, Outlet Liquors, What's Your Outlet? I'm Kevin Messeri. That's Mike Bunt, and we'll catch you on the cap. Good night now.